Okay.
Okay, it's great. Oh, wait, let me make you co-host. And you are set, ready to go.
Perfect. All right. Can everyone see my PowerPoint? Or can you see it, Jamie?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'll just give a little bit of an introduction of myself. My name is Karen Locke. I presented with the University of Utah 2 years ago now on this same topic, and I was absolutely thrilled to do it, and I'm thrilled to be invited back. I have spent about 15 years in the whitewater rafting industry. I've worked all over the world as a guide. I started my own business about 5 years ago, teaching swiftwater rescue, which is a course that's based on personal river rescue and then unpinning boats and kayaking and rafting and that sort of stuff. I also work as a EMT, and I work for Grand County Search and Rescue. So I kind of dip my toes in a little bit of everything. So hopefully if you have some questions around any of those, I can let you know. I do have my email up here if anyone has any questions. The company that I own and that I teach swiftwater rescue through is called Confluence Rescue. And then I also manage an adaptive rafting company. You might have all heard them before, being in Utah. I'm actually here right now in Park City. Our main branches in Park City, we are called the National Ability Center, and we offer adaptive recreation for folks of all abilities. About 90% of our folks come with physical or cognitive disabilities. So I do have a background in that as well. Yeah, feel free to take down my email address. I am available at all times through email. And if you are ever interested in taking a swiftwater rescue course, feel free to reach out. We will have time at the end of this session for questions. All right, so training on the river. Let me grab my notes up really quickly. All right, so when y'all are headed out on a river trip, I usually ask people where they think planning and where good risk management starts. And typically for most rafting trips you're going to do, if they're expedition style trips, if you're going out for days at a time, or you're going out on a river that you've never been on before, you are starting that planning process and that accident avoidance and that risk management at home. Well before you get to the river trip. We've all seen those folks at the put-in who are like, oh, who has this piece of gear? Who has a med kit? Who has a satellite phone? To me, that's when things kind of start to go wrong. So if I'm going out on a bigger river trip, there's 3 things I'm really looking at when putting a trip together. So I look for good training, and that is, what are folks' experience on the river? What's my experience on the river? Is this river that I'm going on, is it a step up in my ability levels? Do I feel comfortable on it? When's my last swiftwater rescue course? Do I need to practice some of those skills that might come in more handy on this river? We practice a lot of skills in our swiftwater rescue courses. It's like throw bagging and swimming. And maybe if I'm coming up on a big river trip, I'm practicing some of those skills to get ready for it. I recently rode the Zambezi River, and I practiced a lot before I went out there because that was a step above my ability level. So swiftwater rescue courses are a great place to get good training from. The American Canoe Association is a great resource for those, and there's a lot of companies in Utah that run these trainings. We recommend redoing a course or redoing a recertification about every 2 years. It's really good practice, to keep doing those courses over and over again. Repetition is great. I also, when I'm getting out to get ready for a big river trip, I like to think about my knowledge. And so knowledge is a hugely encompassing thing. For me, it's, do I have good knowledge about what we're going to be seeing on the river? Have I done my research? Do I know what the weather is going to be? If I'm in Utah, that's specifically important because if there is rain in specific places, we might get flash flooding. Beaches might get washed out. We want to be really careful about where we're camping. If I'm going on a river that I've never been on before, I will seek out other people on the trip. Have you been on this river before? Have you rode this rapid before? What's this like? Getting that information and pulling it together for your group is great risk management before you're getting out on the river. I also like to ask people, what's your experience level? If you're going out with new folks that you've never been on the river with, Have you thrown a throw bag before? Have you assisted with rescues? Do you know how to set up a Z-drag system? What's your comfortableness with swimming in the water? This is all really important stuff to know before you head out on the river. And then the last one for risk management or accident avoidance that I really put a lot of emphasis on is good gear. So we want to make sure that our med kits are fully stocked, that we have the gear that we need, that our satellite phones are charged, that if we're bringing ropes and pulleys and things for extractions because we're doing maybe a more difficult trip where things could, go wrong, we have a bunch of like gear, just in case, that all that gear is in tip-top shape. I'm also checking my own gear. So I'm going through my helmet, I'm going through my PFD, and I'm encouraging other people to do the same thing. Checking for rips, holes, tears. When I went on the Zambezi River, it's very high water. So I bought myself a new life jacket for that section of river because that's going to give me the most flotation. So not only am I checking my gear, I'm also checking the group's gear. So I'm checking those med kits, those satellite phones, emergency gear, and things like that, along with my own gear. I put together a little list of things I like to carry on the river. So the first 6 items are items that I always carry on the river. We always use our own personal flotation devices, like I was just saying. Get a personal flotation device that you like. Try some different ones out. Flotation devices disintegrate a little bit over the years, especially here in Utah with the sun and the sand and things like that. So I'm replacing mine about every 2 to 3 years. It gets a good amount of use, and I want to make sure that that floats me adequately. And as it gets older, as it gets stained, sun damage, the flotation is going to decrease in it. So I'm replacing that every once in a while, and I'm checking it constantly every year. On my PFD, I carry a few things. So I have them listed out, but I also brought my own jacket. So communication on the river can be quite difficult. So I highly encourage everyone to carry a whistle on their life jacket. And I have mine on a little tether so that I can put it in my mouth and turn my head at the same time. We use whistles quite often on the river, so very important that everyone has these because sometimes yelling just will not get your voice across the river. Also, I highly encourage people to have knives on their PFDs. Often when you are rafting or kayaking, you are working around ropes, and that is quite dangerous. We don't like it. We call ropes in the water snakes in the water. And so if you are working in a raft or in a kayak and around ropes, you want to make sure that you have a knife. Oops, my blur is a little bit, got to get it to the right. So I carry a knife on my jacket, and this can be used if something were to happen and a rope were to get tangled around someone or a rope were to get really tight. I can cut that rope with my knife. In 15 years of rafting, I've only ever used it once to cut a rope, but it is wonderful to have. You should have this as a piece of your personal safety gear. I also carry locking carabiners on my jacket. So a locking carabiner, you have to twist or screw the gate to get it closed. And this is very important because if you have non-locking carabiners that just have this portion and just open freely like this, they can get stuck and they can get entrapped on things. So if I had this on my jacket and it didn't lock and I were to get thrown into something, let's say a rope or my boat, this could get stuck onto a piece of rope and I could then become entangled in a scenario. So I very much encourage to have these locking carabiners so that when they're locked, if I hit something, this is not going to open up and get me entangled. I also have helmet on here. Helmets are very important. There's lots of different styles. Some helmets have the holes in the top of the helmets, and those are great for a number of things, mainly ventilation here in the desert when it gets really hot. I prefer my helmet to not have any of the holes up on top of the helmet. When you are swimming, having a helmet that is fully encapsulated is nice. Because you can create a pillow of water over your head, and with a brim here, you can make yourself a little pocket of air. If you have holes on the top of your helmet and you're swimming, the water is going to be coming through your helmet and onto your face. So a lot of this stuff is going to be personal preference. And I really encourage my students and my participants to try out other people's gear, try out a variety of it. Everyone likes something different. Don't just grab the first PFD or helmet and use that. If you're getting into rafting or serious kayaking, definitely research your gear and find out what works best for you and what you like the best. Because if you like it, you're going to wear it. If you don't like it, you're not going to wear it. I also have been highly encouraging folks to wear bright colored helmets. I know that my helmet is not bright colored. I'm getting a different one. But if you are in the water, let's say you were in a kayak and you end up swimming, this helmet, this brown helmet, is going to end up looking like a rock in the river. So if I, for some reason, was to get stuck somewhere up against a rock, up against a tree, if I were to get foot in trapped, you're not going to be able to see me. So I highly encourage like the bright high vis colors, yellows, pinks, and things like that. And then that's kind of a personal preference, but a safety thing for sure. There is additional gear that you can bring on the river. This is more if you're getting into the expedition, longer, more technical types of river. So tubular webbing is something that we bring on a river, along with pulleys and rope that can help create us Z-drag systems, which is a system if a boat is stuck in the middle of the river, we can create a rope system and what we call mechanical advantage to help pull those boats off. So as you get into more expedition style rafting and start bumping up your game a little bit, it's definitely something you want to keep in the back of your mind is building out your kit. I also highly encourage to bring along pocket guides. I carry one. I've been rafting for 15 years and I carry this little pocket guide. It's just called Field Rescue. It's waterproof. And if you're a rafter, you know that we've all been on the river before and like waiting for, shuttle or waiting for something. And this is a great little resource. I read it in my downtime when I have nothing else to do and I'm done de-rigging, but it's also a nice resource for me if something happens and I don't know how to react to it. I can pull out this little guide and it has examples of different rope system setups and stuff like that. So no shame in carrying pocket guides. There's medical ones out there. There's swiftwater rescue ones. There's technical rope rescue. Absolutely no shame in carrying these. I'm also really big on carrying, I do carry a first aid kit, but I also carry multiple rescue CPR masks around. So I carry one in my PFD and I carry one in my dry bag as well as in our med kit. And this is just great to have on your person if you do need to give someone CPR. I also carry medical gloves in the inside pocket of my jacket. PFDs, again, when you're shopping for one, get one that you like. But if you plan on carrying more items, such as masks and gloves and things like that, you're going to want to find the ones that have the pockets either on the back or on the front. And then try them on, see what you like. They're all different. They all have different styles and different functions to them. So it's important to kind of do your research for those. I want to talk a little bit about the power of water. We won't really go into a big hydrology lesson, but when we talk about rivers, we measure them in CFS. So CFS stands for cubic foot of water per second. And what we're saying is like, if you draw a line across the river, every single second, this many cubic feet of water are passing by. Typical rivers, typical's running, a good river is probably going to be somewhere between 1,000 CFS and 30,000 CFS. So it can vary. And again, this goes back to that good knowledge as you're reading about the rivers that you're going on. Is the water going up? Is the water going down? Is it an appropriate level for us to go rafting or pack rafting or kayaking? I think a lot of times underestimate the power of water. It is extremely powerful. And I've learned that even more and more from teaching every year. So 1 cubic foot of water, it's about the size of a milk crate. It holds 7.5 gallons of water. So that cubic foot of water weighs 62 pounds. Now we have different kinds of rivers, right? Velocity is always changing. We have some rivers that move super, super slow. And then we have some rivers that move super fast. And what is determined by that is usually the gradient of the river. So when we're looking at one river that has, let's say, 5,000 CFS in it, it might be moving pretty slow. And maybe that's a river that doesn't have a lot of force to it. So you can like wade across it. Those are the rivers that you're tubing. But maybe another river that's 5,000 CFS has a lot more gradient drop to it. And that water, as it's traveling over that gradient drop, even though it's the same amount of water, it's going to pick up velocity. It's going to pick up force as it's traveling down the water, or sorry, as it's traveling down the river. And it's going to be that much more powerful. So you do want to be really careful, especially when you start thinking about like swimming in rivers or wading in rivers. A lot of people like to use the basketball analogy. If y'all have been around rivers before and kayak or raft, you'll probably hear someone say like a cubic foot of water is equal to a basketball. So imagine if you're on a river with 5,000 CFS, 5,000 basketballs passing you every second. I actually like to use the analogy of chickens because they're about the same size as a basketball, and it's a little bit scarier. So just imagine like 5,000 chickens running at you. And if it's a pretty fast moving river with, a good gradient drop, those chickens, if you're swimming, like those chickens are going to bowl you over. If you're trying to wade in the river and 5,000 chickens are coming at you every single second and they each weigh 62 pounds, like that's a lot of force. So I like to use that analogy, just like really imprint that image in your head that rivers and water are extremely powerful. So a little bit about personal safety on the water. Apologize, let me move my notes a little bit. So when you are around rivers, again, you want to look at them and judge the velocity of the river. You want to judge how fast that water is moving. You've probably all heard before, don't stand up in rivers. You can stand up in rivers, but you just want to be careful about how and when and where you do it. So again, if a river is not moving very fast, you can wade across that river. You want to be careful about a couple of things. You want to be careful about foot entrapment. So that's when you're swimming along and you try to stand up and you might have a rock and if you're trying to stand up and you're going downstream, your foot could get stuck underneath the rock. And then you have all the weight of that water hitting at your back. So you're not going to be able to stand up anymore. If it's a really slow moving river, let's say it's up to your waist, yeah, you should be able to wade across. But the second that water starts pulling you downstream, you want to make sure that you're lifting your feet and not trying to stand up, because if the water's pushing you downstream, that means that the velocity is picking up. It's more powerful. So you're going to want to pick up your feet, lay on your back in a defensive swimmer position, and go downstream. Entrapments are something that happen with a couple different things. We often have different things in the river. There's different things that make rapids. So we have that gradient drop. We also have constriction that makes rapids. So if a river goes from really wide to really narrow, if y'all have been on like Westwater Canyon before, that's an example of a constriction canyon. And then we have obstacles. So y'all that have been rafting before, kayaking, you'll probably see, you go rafting down, you see rocks and you see trees in the water, and that's what's making the rapid. As you're swimming in the river, or maybe you're wading and then you end up swimming, you want to be careful that you're not running into these obstacles. You want to make sure that you don't have to see a big old rock coming up and that you're swimming into it. Because again, that water is so powerful. 62 pounds per chicken hitting you on your back. You could get stuck up against something. Happens to rafts all the time. It can also happen to people. So if you see obstacles in the river, like rocks, logs, things like that, you just want to swim away from them. I have a little example here. This is like a little example of a foot entrapment scenario. So you can see this person in the top photo put their foot down. It gets stuck in a rock. That water pushing on their back is going to put their head underwater. This is 100% preventable, and it is not a good scenario to be in. It is very, very extremely hard to extract someone with a foot entrapment scenario, and it often does not end up with a person coming out still alive. But again, 100% preventable. You can see the person in the bottom photo. They are swimming in the defensive swimmer position with their butt the lowest part of their body, and their feet are high up above. If you're swimming away from something, you can still swim like that with your arms behind you, or you can get on your stomach with your feet behind you, still pretty much on the surface. You're not standing up and you're swimming. Another danger I wanted to talk about, you might all see this in Salt Lake City, in some areas, low-head dams. Low-head dams are one of the scariest things that we see as swiftwater rescue instructors. They are the concrete dams, the man-made concrete dams that you see that are completely uniform across a river, and they create what we call a hydraulic, so water going over top of the concrete dam, and then the water comes up over top and then circles back on itself. Because of the uniformity of a concrete dam, it's really hard for objects or for people to escape that hydraulic, that water coming back on itself. So these are extremely, extremely dangerous. If you do see someone playing around a low-head dam, please warn them, please have them move if you can, convince them to. If you see someone who has fallen into a low-head dam, please do not go after them. You can very quickly become a victim yourself. So call the authorities, call 911, call dispatch and search and rescue, and the fire department will come out and help with that situation. This photo here is an example of a kayaker stuck pinned in between two rocks. We call these sieves or strainers. These are also very dangerous scenarios. If you get into kayaking, please take a river safety course where they specifically talk about how to extract folks from kayaks who are pinned. You should have rescue training if you do get into this amount of kayaking. But this is an extremely dangerous situation. And the one thing I wanted to mention that goes along with this photo is if you do come across something like this by chance, your best bet with taking care of yourself also in mind is to get hands on that person. So hands on that kayaker or hands on the person who is stuck. Very, very important, because if they are in a kayak or if their body is stuck up against a rock, it's very easy for them to shift and potentially go under the water. So you can see this guy's head is above water, but I would want to get hands on him pretty quickly to make sure that he didn't shift to be underwater. I want to talk a little bit about scene awareness and vigilance on the river. So I always keep my head on a swivel. I am looking upstream. I am looking downstream. If a scenario is happening on the river, some kind of like emergency situation, we always have a couple people, a couple resources upstream and downstream of the scenario. Downstream is the more important one. So you can imagine that if a person wasn't trapped up against a rock, that scenario can change very quickly. It's very dynamic, right? So that person, they might be trapped up against a rock, but once they potentially lose consciousness and their body goes limp, they might come off of that rock. So you want to have someone downstream, or a couple people downstream, ideally, ready to go after that person. Yeah, you want to prepare for the uncertainty, to prepare for not only your primary plan, but also an alternative and contingency plan. If you have the resources in something like search and rescue, we use something called an incident command system, the ICS, which was brought about by FEMA. And it basically says that one person can only have a span of control of 6 people under them. So if you are in a larger rescue scenario, you would want to try to put one person in charge as the lead, or as what we call them, the incident commander, and then have resources under. So one person in charge, no more than 6 people under that person. When we are in rescue scenarios, we also make sure that we are going slow to go fast. And by that, I mean that we are not, when we see someone or something happening, that we ourselves are not putting ourselves in danger. We are not rushing or running, because we can easily make that scenario worse. We could easily trip, fall, take ourselves out as a resource, or potentially create another incident with an incident. So that's something we continuously say in river rescue training, is go slow to go fast. And then tolerance for uncertainty is really just the river is such a dynamic place. You want to be ready for things that you don't expect to happen. You want to be ready for other people coming downstream. You know, if it's a busy river, other boats, other kayakers might be coming down, and you want to prepare, you know, to stop them. You want to have extra resources and your head on a swivel so that when the uncertainty happens, you can deal with it in a timely manner. This is a little good example of a downstream safety here. Someone set up to rescue this person that is swimming. When we talk about rescue scenarios, we want to make sure that we have our priorities in line. And these go pretty much in line with, first responder scenarios and first responder priorities. So we are always number one, right? If we are helping out with a scenario, we are not the ones that put ourselves in that emergency situation. We are volunteering to help. So it is not technically our emergency. We are there to help. We are number one. My group, the rest of the people that are there to help or assist are number two priority. Our number three priority is going to be the patient. And I have a line written here because this is the moment where you can take a big pause. Everyone can slow down a little bit. If your patient ends up becoming a victim, and we'll talk about that here in a second, if your patient ends up becoming a victim, you want to take a big pause and reassess and make a new plan. And then your last priority on that list is going to be equipment recovery, getting all of your equipment back. Communication on the river. It's really hard. I just wanted to give you a couple examples. Quick examples. So like I talked about having a whistle on your PFD. If you are on a river and you need to get a hold of someone and you need, it's too loud to use your voice, you can do one loud, long whistle blast. And what that basically means is attention. It means look around. Either you're going to miss lunch, either a boat is stuck. It's just a general catch-all, one whistle blast. If there is a really big emergency going on, a medical emergency, use 3 loud, long whistle blasts. This is universal across the world. So 1 whistle blast for attention, 3 whistle blasts for true emergency. Well, you can also use hand signals, and I'll give you a couple really quick ones and really easy ones for you to remember. So if you have a true emergency, again, 3 whistle blasts, but a way that you can show that with your hands is you can cross your arms over top of your face or over top of your head into an X, and that is universal for emergency. If we're ever pointing on the river, we're always pointing in the positive direction. I'm never going to say, look at crazy waterfall over there. Don't go over there. I'm always going to point where I want you to go. So if you fall out of your kayak and you're swimming or your buddy's swimming, you always point in the direction that you are having them swim. You can also use if someone falls into the water and you're not sure if they're okay and you can't shout to them and they're in the water, you can ask them a question and have them respond by tapping the top of your head. And tapping the top of your head is a question. It's, are you okay? And you can make that as big as you want to. And the person in the water or on the other side of the river who can't necessarily hear you can tap the top of their head back if they are okay. If they're not okay, I just have them not do anything and or the big X for true emergency. So just a couple quick hand signals and whistle signals for y'all to have in the back of your head. I wanted to go over a couple common injuries, things that we see on the river. Of course, we have our environmental injuries. So we have dehydration, hypothermia, insects and animal bites. Oh, I put hypothermia twice on here, sorry. Sunburn, hypothermia, insect and snake bites, and dehydration. All of these are preventable. We don't want you to go through the entire list, but you know how to prevent them by, being prepared, bringing your sunscreen, bringing good layers, even if it's hot out. If the water is cold, bring some extra layers because it gets shady. Night is always going to happen. We can, not bother animals so we don't get bit by them. We can wear bug spray, things like that, wear long sleeves so you're not getting bitten by mosquitoes, stay away from bees and that sort of stuff. Dehydration, of course, very preventable. Have you do water checks regularly, check to make sure that you're drinking enough water. We typically ask our participants to drink about two full water bottles a day. So by lunch, we'll check in with people to make sure that they drank a full water bottle and then a full water bottle in that evening as well. The injuries that I want to speak a little bit more to are going to be our trauma injuries. These are the things that I've seen that happen more common on the river. I will say that the most injuries that I've been a part of are injuries that happen on the riverbank. People get off the boat, they're at camp, walking around on slippery rocks, they fall, they trip. Sprains and strains are pretty common on the river. I can't lift my leg up, but I have a torn MCL right now from a fall on a river in Mexico. So those are very common, and those are preventable to a certain degree. You just want to make sure that you're going slow, preparing people if you get out of a boat and it's slippery, that you're warning everyone else, you're being careful around those riverbanks. Other common injuries that I've seen on the river that are results of trauma. I have seen a few dislocations, mainly shoulder dislocations, and that happens more often in paddle boats where you have customers paddling through the rapids and they overextend, a wave hits them and knocks them back and their arm comes out of the socket. I've also had it happen where when someone is falling out of a boat, they go to grab a hold of something and their arm dislocates. Depending on where you are, how far away you are from definitive care is going to really determine what you end up doing for that person. For dislocations, you want to make that patient as comfortable as possible. If it is their first dislocation, it is going to be an evacuation. And most commonly, to make the patient as comfortable as possible, you're going to be reducing that dislocation if you have been trained and if you know how to. Of course, there's a couple of things you want to watch out for if you are reducing someone's arm. You don't want to force it back in. If you are close to definitive care within like 2 hours, I would say, of a hospital, I would just leave it. I have had participants lay on their stomach before and then hold on to something heavy to relieve that pressure and to tire out their muscles before, so their muscles aren't spasming as much. And then that actually makes it easier for the doctor to put in as well. But if you are further away from definitive care and you do know how to reduce something, that is going to be the best and easiest for the patient. The quicker that you get a arm reduced or any dislocation, the quicker that you get something reduced, the easier it's going to go back in because their muscles aren't going to be spasming. Blunt force trauma is something else I see in rafting. When you get into expedition rafting, you have a lot of gear, you have oars, you have a metal frame. And when those boats start to tip or when you hit something really hard, people go flying into those hard objects. So I have seen a broken jaw from a paddle. I have seen teeth knocked out, all sorts of different things. You want to be really careful with oars and metal frames and lots of gear. You want to try to pad things out if possible and not have sharp corners. But it is something, unfortunately, that you do see in rafting quite a bit, is people getting hit by gear. So make sure that your med kits are prepared for scenarios like that. And then degloving is something that I definitely wanted to talk about. I've seen this happen quite a bit, actually, and it is not the greatest thing in the world to see. It's a little bit scary to see. And degloving is when it's usually a ring is tight around a finger and you go to grab onto something and the ring pulls the skin of your finger off. Treatment for this, I would definitely evacuate someone for any kind of degloving, even if it was just a finger. I would wrap it in some gauze, keep it clean. Rivers are very dirty. You are worried about infection with things like degloving. So that is a wrap, and I would transport them pretty rapidly out to a hospital. I take off the reason I wanted to say this one specifically is I take off all of my rings rafting, and I highly recommend that other people do too. This is a pretty ugly injury, typically not life-threatening, but a very ugly injury that you just don't want to have on your river trips. So be careful about that. Take off your rings. The last one I wanted to talk about is our more obvious injury prevention is drowning. When you have a drowning patient, when you are able to get a hold of them, you do want to bring them over to the bank. Obviously, try to find a nice hard surface to do compressions on. You do want to take off their PFD completely. A lot of PFDs or life jackets have the zipper or the buttons down the middle, the buckles down the middle, and you want to make sure that you're not just opening it, that you're taking it completely off so that you're not doing compressions on the foam backing of the PFD. You also want to start with rescue breaths with a drowning patient. And the biggest thing for me, that I wanted to impress on this slide is that if you are working on someone who is entrapped in the water, who is face down, who is moving away from patient recovery to victim recovery, you do want to try to work on them for a decent amount of time. There are studies done with healthy individuals, younger individuals in cold water that have been resuscitated up to 90 minutes later. I know that doesn't sound practical to potentially work on someone, whether that's doing CPR or whether that's trying to get someone out of the river face up and get them some air for 90 minutes. So there's going to be a lot of determining factors, but typically in a search and rescue field where we have a lot of resources, and we typically will have, like, if that scenario was happening, we would have maybe a helicopter and ambulance there ready to take them to the hospital. We would try to work for as long as possible up to that 90 minutes. Obviously, a couple of things would have you stop sooner. So if you had limited resources, so limited people working on the scene, and you were getting rescuer fatigue and you were nervous about, obviously injuring yourself or becoming part of the incident, you would stop sooner. Or if you were further away from definitive care. So if there wasn't a helicopter or an ambulance or an AED close by, that time might be a little bit shorter. Any general questions about rafting? I'm sorry, that was like the more rushed version. But yeah, I'm available. Does anyone have any questions about anything I touched on or anything I didn't touch on that you might have questions?
So Karen, you just talked about, working and doing CPR.
Yeah.
90-minute time. For me as a trauma person, any outward signs of trauma, would you stop that sooner?
Yes.
Obviously if there's, because you can't replace blood or something like that. So if it's just kind of straight face down, cold water, no outward signs of trauma, you have that 90-minute window, correct?
Yes, I would agree. And yeah, again, there's going to be a lot of things that are determining if you can go that long.
Okay.
Typically, I have seen a few foot entrapment scenarios. So someone who has their foot stuck and their head is under the water, and we would work up to 90 minutes to extract that person before considering a victim recovery.
Okay. And then I had one more question, and please, if you guys are thinking, I don't want to take up the time with questions, but put your questions in the chat, or open them up, come off mute and ask Karen. But one more question, again, I think where people underestimate is maybe where you have what looks like calm water on the top, but underneath is not so much. Is there tips, tricks to where if you're looking at something just from the surface, what can kind of give you that, maybe I shouldn't cross this, or maybe I shouldn't try?
Sure. So if I was trying to cross a river, one other thing I would look at is like entry and exit points. What's downstream? Even if it's calm water here, is it, is there more velocity? Is it moving faster downstream? You can also use a paddle. So I'll take a paddle and flip it upside down so the handle is down, and you can kind of feel your way along the river. So maybe, the first few feet are pretty shallow, but then you can't tell because it's murky. So you can use your paddle to kind of push along the river. Wading is definitely a technical skill, and if you aren't comfortable doing it, I would keep it very, very limited. Yeah, because like you were saying, not only is there the water acting, in different ways on top, there's current, there's eddies, there's eddy lines, all this different hydrology, but that's also happening in a vertical fashion as well. So you could be wading across the river and your feet are hitting a completely different current than your waist is if you're waist deep in water.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
If you are a witness to somebody going downstream,
Mm-hmm.
and I know you say don't jump in after them, but you call 911, do you try to run down and stay along with them? Or What do you recommend?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I would try, if possible, to run along the river. I would try to make contact with that person with my voice. So if they were conscious, you can always try to help coach people. So like, swim to me, get your feet up. Can you hear me? Come this way. Encouraging them and coaching them to come towards you. If they were face down, I would still encourage to move along with that patient or with that victim in the water. That will give search and rescue and or the fire department, sheriffs, a better idea of where that person's going to end up. It is typically hard for search and rescue to come on a scene, have a point last seen on the river, and then be searching downstream. Like, if you are able to have visuals on that patient, it would decrease the amount of time, hopefully, that that person would be in the water. If possible, again, you are always number one in these scenarios.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
And I definitely like to ask too, especially I think preparing us for what might be coming with all of the melts.
Yes.
You know, anything that you have seen, obviously with more high water, and flood zones, like flood zones can act as rivers, right?
Yes.
So what kind of tips do you have, like in those scenarios, if you have just a flooding area that is going to kind of act like a river, right?
Yeah.
Be in a river area that's flooded over. What are your suggestions for that?
Yeah, like urban rivers. It's gonna be happening this year. I'm not sure does Salt Lake City have any of those like concrete culverts going through? Those are extremely, extremely difficult. The ones that catch the rainwater and the snow melt and stuff. And be extremely careful around those. Dogs, people can fall into them. And because of the uniformity of the concrete, it's just like with low-head dams, having that like channel, the water is going to be moving even faster and even more powerful. And it creates this flow that actually keeps you from being able to make it to the sides of those culverts. They're a really bad design along with low head dams. Sorry, I feel like I'm being a naysayer, but they're really bad design. So again, a lot of just awareness and safety around things that are flooding. You don't know how deep they are. You don't know how fast the water is moving. If you are in flooded areas and you have a life jacket, put it on. Like, better be safe than sorry. Yeah, I think the number one thing I want to convey is that like water is often not given the respect that it sometimes deserves. You know, I do swiftwater rescue training in the water on like class 2 rapids, and I often will pretend to be a foot and trap patient. And by the end of like a couple minutes of being in the water and having water hit my back, I am exhausted. Like, that force of water it just sweeps you off your feet unexpectedly. You know, we've all heard it before. So just vigilance, head on a swivel, and being really careful about those man-made structures that I talked about.
Definitely. All right, please open it up. If any of you guys others have any other questions, please come off mute or put it in the chat box.
Yeah, and I put my email in the chat box as well. I do offer low cost and scholarship-based courses through my company, Confluence Rescue. So if you are interested in ever taking a course, please reach out. It's not proprietary information. I want people to be safe on the river, and we're rarely the ones rescuing ourselves. We're also often asking friends to help out in scenarios. So for me, like, educating more people benefits me as well. It benefits all of us. So yeah, reach out if you have questions or want to take a course.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, Karen.